All right. Today we're going to be talking about votes for women. And that goes directly into our vocabulary word for today, which is suffrage. Suffrage means the right to vote in an election. So when people talk about women's suffrage, they're talking about women's rights to vote. And if you go on YouTube, there's plenty of videos on there about some guys going around taking a petition and getting women to sign the petition to end women's suffrage. And this is very embarrassing for anybody that would do that, that would give away their right to vote. But I think it's an important point to remember because not only for women's right to vote, but everything. If you're not educated, if you don't learn things and take your education seriously, then you're vulnerable for people that are going to try to trick you, that try to take your rights away. You have to be very vigilant about what you know and take things seriously. Just because it's a very important issue doesn't mean it's over your head or you're not important enough to know about these things. You are. You need everybody. If we're going to maintain a free country, then you need to be well educated. You need to know your rights. You need to know vocabulary words and the history of your country. Otherwise, you're vulnerable for these jokesters or just bad people that are going to try to take away your rights or take away your money or whatever it is. So a lot of people will think suffrage is a bad word. Oh yeah, women's suffrage. Yeah, let's get rid of that. And then they don't realize that they're taking away women's rights to vote. So be aware of that. That's just an important side lesson as we're going through this. But today we're going to be talking about votes for women. And right in the mid 1800s, right before the Civil War, uh, a lot of talk was about should we get rid of slavery? Slavery is wrong. And then women started looking around. You know what? We're not in such great shape either. We don't have the right to vote. We don't have the right to sign contracts, own property. We don't have a lot of rights. And women started to understand that if they can't vote, then no one's going to listen to them. If you have a politician that is doing something wrong, and somebody comes up to him and says, "Hey, you're doing this wrong," and that person isn't a voter or doesn't vote or can't vote, that politician's not going to listen to them. But if they can vote, if enough voters get together and say, hey, you're doing something wrong, then that politician's going to be worried that they're going to lose their job in the next election. So women, they always knew this, but I mean, they really started to push the idea that they needed the right to vote because without the right to vote, they can't change anything. Nobody's going to listen to them unless they get this. This is the first objective. We'll get more into this when we get to Susan B. Anthony. But the suffrage movement, women's suffragettes, they got started at 1848. This is before the Civil War in Seneca Falls, New York, where the three people that we're going to talk about today, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth, are become leading figures in the suffragette movement. The idea that women should have rights and that they should have the ability to vote so that they can change any of the unjust laws that were uh, unjustly holding women down. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is Elizabeth Sojourner Truth, and she was a slave. She ran away because, and we look up here, read um, her speech here. She talks about having 13 children, and most of them being sold off to slavery. When you're a slave, you had no right to hold on to your children. They could sell your children away from you at any time that they wanted. This was another brutal part of slavery that was just very inhumane. And so finally, she had enough of losing her children, so she ran away with her baby girl. And then New York ended slavery in 1827, so she was legally free at that point. She didn't have to run or hide or anything like that. And she was one of the people that conflated the ideas of slavery and women's rights and said, look, there's bad things going on here and there's bad things going on here, that all people, whether they're black, white, women, man, they should all be equal. So she was an important voice, and go ahead and read this speech. It's pretty cool. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she is a well-read woman. She's a gifted reader and writer. She would write many of the speeches that the speakers like Susan B. Anthony would say. So she's a pretty big behind-the-scenes movement leader. Uh, so she also said the prolonged slavery of women is the darkest page in human history. She did not. She equated what women were going through with the plight of slavery. And then Susan B. Anthony, Uh, if you look right here, male school teacher said a girl needs to know how to read her Bible and count her egg money, nothing more. And she felt she was capable of much, much more. And why? Since because she's a girl that she can't learn these things. She was smart enough to know um, or to learn about these things, and so she realized very early on that it was the right to vote that was going to change things. That if she didn't have the right to vote, she can't make people do things differently. She can't make them listen to her opinion and her ideas. Why should they listen to her if she cannot threaten their job, when it comes to elections? So she actually went down and tried to vote, even though it was illegal. She was fined $100, refused to pay, said, "I'm not paying it. What are you going to do about it?" And so she became a very important and very powerful figure in the women's movement and the suffrage. She was one of the most famous suffragettes. When people talk about women's rights, Susan B. Anthony is at the top of the list. Okay, unfortunately, all these women did not get a chance to see um, that day when women were given the right to vote in the 19th Amendment in 1920. They had all passed away by then. But they did, their fight was successful, even though they didn't live to see it. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you learned a lot from this. And remember that education, your knowledge, is your protection against people that will do harm to you or try to make things difficult for you. So make sure you study, make sure that you know all that you can, take it seriously. Have a great day, and I'll see you another time.